Ready to go anytime?
Okay. Ready with us? Okay, we're in session, regular June 10th meeting of the Board of School Directors. Here we go. We'll open with the reading of the meeting notice. Ms. Jones?
The Board of Directors of the School District of the City of Erie, PA will meet in regular session on Wednesday, June 10th, 2020, online via Zoom meeting at 6:00 p.m. by request of the President, John C. Harkins.
Roll call.
Ms. Cooley?
She said that she'd make every effort to join us as soon as she can, but she had a prior commitment, so she's excused, but is going to join us later.
Mrs. Feeney?
Here.
Mrs. McNair? Mrs. McNair? Mr. Nichols?
Angela Sumner, are you with us?
Sumner, you're muted.
I am here.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins?
Here.
Ms. Sheridan?
Here.
Mr. Spagel?
Tom also has another commitment and will join us as soon as he can farther into the meeting.
Mr. Titus?
Here.
Mr. Harkins?
Here. Okay, tonight when we pledge allegiance followed by a moment of silence, that moment of silence will be for the following members of our school district family who have passed away since our last meeting. Carol Ann Nestor Bruno, a retired bus attendant who passed away on March 30th, 2020. For Barry Grossman, a former teacher at Academy High School in 1968 and 69, and also Erie County executive who passed away on May 21st, 2020. For Walter William Bill Brown, retired plumber who passed away on May 27th, 2020. Michael Pruvideni, a retired teacher who passed away on May 30th, 2020. Walter Bagnoni, another retired teacher at Twin Tech who passed away on May 31st, 2020. William MacArthur, former teacher who passed away on June 2nd, 2020. Carrie Bongiorno, fifth grade teacher at Harding Elementary School, who passed away on June 2nd, 2020. So now we'll pledge allegiance to the flag, followed by a moment of silence. All please participate now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America.
to the republic for which it stands,
One nation.
God,
God.
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Next, we have recognition of students who performed extraordinarily well on the college boards while participating in the middle school talent search project, presented by Colette Zagorsky, our assessment coordinator. Colette?
Thank you for the opportunity to celebrate our middle school talent search students from the 2018-19 school year. We started with 129 middle school students who took the PSAT in October of 2018. Of those students, we had 81 that exceeded the average score for college-bound sophomores and were included in SAT prep classes prior to taking the college boards in June of 2019. I am pleased to announce that we had 44 students who scored at or above the 50th percentile rank in evidence-based reading and writing and or math relative to a college-bound senior. I would like to honor these students for this great accomplishment. Simon Acosta, Caden Ballman, Isabella Benedict, Elizabeth Bolt, Elmina Brovina, Owen Brown, Caitlin Campbell, Caitlin Collins, Danaya Cooley, Hadessa Davis, Dana Davis, Nathaniel Devlin, Zachariah Fenno, Novalee Fisher, Veda Frontino, Miranda Gala, Andrew Gardner, Isabella Giannoni, Shauna Gorton, Bronwyn Heisler, Lavariana Hunter, Darian Johnson, Alyssa Koss, Journey Luwanis Gray, Sarah Meyer, Grace Miller, Malachi Miller Lombardo, Zachary Mitchell, Evan Nadzum, Madison Porter, Pratik Rai, Ian Rosell, Amanda Ross, Riley Schreckengost, Owen Sinnott, Xavier Spalding, Jacob Switkowski, Alexander Toma, Susan Vera, Michael Washik, Kyle Westfall, Eric Wilkinson, Navia Williams, and Austin Williams. Congratulations to all of these students. You should truly be proud of your accomplishment. Thank you very much for allowing me to share this with you this evening.
Thank you, Paulette. I have 3 executive sessions to announce for public knowledge. On Wednesday, May 20th, 2020, online via Zoom meeting from 11:01 a.m. till 11:39 a.m. we met regarding personnel matters. Then on Wednesday, June 3rd of 2020, online via Zoom meeting from 8:01 p.m. till 8:35 p.m. we met regarding legal and personnel matters in executive session. And then this evening, Wednesday, June 10th, 2020, via Zoom meeting online, we met from 5:25 p.m. till 5:55 p.m. regarding negotiations, legal and personnel matters. Okay, the next item is the report of the superintendent, and it's got several items. Brian, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I'd like to start my report tonight by introducing Mr. Brian Lasher. He's one of our teachers over at Collegiate Academy, and he's here tonight to do a presentation on Mr. John Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Polito. Members of the Erie School Board, it is an honor and a privilege to talk to you tonight. Just briefly why I'm doing this, about a year ago, Bob Heibel, who was the founder of the Research Intelligence Analyst Program, asked me if I would give a brief to Rotary on John Boyd. He and some members of the community believe that John Boyd is a man to be remembered, and they feel that the Erie School Board might want to consider an appropriate recognition of John Boyd. So who is John Boyd? Arguably, he is the most consequential military strategist of the 20th century. And the reason he's important to us is he's from Erie, Pennsylvania. There are a number of people that I have spoken with who actually knew John Boyd. And one is Sally Kohler. She grew up with John Boyd and John Boyd's sister, and she described him as solid. Connie Wolford said he was crazy. Chris Wolford said he was dynamic. Dr. Gary Brotherson called him a maverick, and Jim Vieira said he was intimidating. And what I liked about each of these descriptions is they are unique, but they're also accurate. A lot of this brief is based on a book by Robert Coram. I'll show you the picture of the book at the end of the brief, but it's called The Fighter Pilot Who Changed the Art of War, and I would think that that is an appropriate title. Just an overview of his whole career, so I'm going to run through this pretty quickly, but he was born here in Erie. He joined the military during World War II, but it was late in the game. He was enlisted, and it really wasn't until the Korean War where he started to have an impact. He went over to Korea. He was a fighter pilot, and then from there he got orders to the Fighter Weapons School, which is at Nellis Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas. And it was there where he became arguably the best fighter pilot in the United States military. He also authored a book called The Aerial Attack Study. I'll go over that briefly in a little bit. As a major, he developed something known as the energy maneuverability theory, which is also something that could be used to design aircraft. As a lieutenant colonel, he was the central member of what was called the Fighter Mafia, which challenged the defense budget, and they were instrumental in developing the F-16. And then as a colonel, he started to read heavily about military history, military strategy. He developed a brief called Patterns of Destruction. He also developed a theory of creativity known as destruction and creativity. His most important theory that's probably most familiar in the military and also in business is called the OODA loop, which I will show you that. And he was also instrumental in the design of the strategy for the Gulf War. He's cited in over 300 magazines, journals, books, and he passed away at the age of 70. So he grew up on Lincoln Avenue. His father developed pneumonia and died when Boyd was turning 3. He actually was buried on Boyd's 3rd birthday. And he did not take out an insurance policy, so that left his mother and his 4 siblings. And his mother basically made ends meet by selling baked goods and stationery and conducting telephone solicitations. And I think this is also in keeping with the Erie School District, that we have a number of disadvantaged students, and here you have a disadvantaged student who really made a mark. He attended Harding, he attended Strong Vincent, and he developed close friendships during that time. His friends were Jack Arbuckle and Chet Reichert. But there were also teachers and other males in the community that played a very important role as a mentor to John Boyd. The first was Jack Eckerd. His stepsister was going to school with John Boyd at Harding at the time. In 5th grade, he took John Boyd for an airplane ride, and that must have had an impact because he was always fascinated with flying aircraft. The other person, very important, was Art Weibel. He was the swim coach and the polo coach at Strong Vincent. And during that time, John Boyd was the captain of the water polo team. And he also finished 2nd in the 200-meter freestyle at States. The other person very important in Boyd's life is Frank Pettinato, and he was the chief assistant lifeguard at the Peninsula. These pictures are courtesy of Mary Drapshow. This is from the National Athletic Honor Society in his 1944 Strong Vincent yearbook. That's from the swim team. This is from the water polo team. As I mentioned, he joined the military at the end of World War II. By the time he arrived in theater, the war was pretty much over, but he did serve as an enlisted man for the end of the war. With that, he was able to get a GI Bill, and he attended the University of Iowa. It was there that he met and married Mary Bruce. And he would stay married to Mary Bruce through the rest of his life. He joined ROTC, graduated in 1951. He was accepted there to be a fighter pilot for the Korean War. And he trained in the F-86. You can see the pictures of the F-86 there. When he arrived, he was considered one of the best pilots in the squadron. Many thought he would have become an ace, but he arrived so late in the war that by the time he was appointed to be an element leader, the hostilities had ceased. From there, he got orders to what was called the Fighter Weapons School. And here he developed a reputation as an instructor that really was second to none. It started out as a bet. He said that I can change my position with you in 20 seconds. And what he meant by that is he'd go out over the area. The student pilot would be directly behind him, and he would completely change the position so that he would be behind the student in a firing position within 20 seconds. And the way he would do that would be to slam the controls all the way back in the cockpit, power down, and create an air brake and slow the aircraft from 100 knots or 400 knots to 150 knots. The student would fly by him. He would slam on the rudder, corkscrew the aircraft, fall in behind him, and he could do this in 20 seconds. It was later amended to 40 seconds because in time, this became the training ground for all the fighter pilots in the United States military, including the Navy and the Marine Corps. While he was there, also, he authored something called the Aerial Attack Study. And what's unique here is that he wasn't asked to do this. And as a matter of fact, he was told not to do this. His boss said that they were developing a manual already at the Systems Command. And so he gave him no time and no encouragement, but yet he did that. And in doing it, he was the first one to basically help to codify and to illustrate and to document methods that a pilot could use. And what he found is there were not an unlimited amount of things that a fighter pilot would meet in the air. They were limited by the altitude and the airspeed. And so he found that for every maneuver, there was an option available to not only the pilot, but also the enemy. And he discovered a counter maneuver there. And so he developed this manual, submitted it to the Systems Command, and then they accepted it and called it superior to the one that they were developing. And when his boss finally read the manual, he hadn't actually read it. He agreed and apologized. But one of the things he did was he illustrated in a number of different things and showed his ability to build spatial relationships here. While he was there, it also shows the character that his mother had instilled in him. When she was young, she taught him that as long as he learned to do right and he held his integrity, that was superior to any position or any money. And we see this when the first African-American instructor reported. His name was Oscar Brooks. And the squadron used to go to a place called the Sahara, which was the Las Vegas Hotel. And his boss, who was Vernon Spradling, said, John, I don't think he should go with us. And he's yes, he is going. And when he pushed back on it, he said, listen, the Air Force is integrated. We've been integrated. We don't have a problem. It's their problem. And he said this in rather colorful language. But at the time, Las Vegas and Nevada was not integrated. So it shows that he stood up and he did what was right, regardless of the circumstances. From there, he got a set of orders to Georgia Tech. He got another bachelor's degree, this time in engineering. And he was sitting in a thermodynamics class, and he had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that in combat, it wasn't airspeed, it wasn't power that would enable a pilot to defeat the enemy, it was energy. So he came up with this theory called the energy maneuverability theory, and he tried to develop a mathematical equation that he would be able to use to evaluate aircraft performance, which he did. He developed this thing, and from there he got a set of orders to Eglin Air Force Base down in Florida. And he developed a very close relationship with a guy by the name of Thomas Christie, who was a defense analyst. And this is one of the unique things about Boyd, is that he developed a cadre of followers. They were called his acolytes in the book, but they were all analysts. They were all defense analysts. And Christie figured out a way for him to basically commandeer $1 million in computer time. And he was also able to get data from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on enemy aircraft. And he started to plug this in and realize, the design of the aircraft and the ability. And it showed that our aircraft were actually inferior to the Russians at the time. So he wrote this report. It got to the Pentagon. And we have the head here of the Tactical Air Command, after listening to the brief, and he said, okay, Major Boyd, what do we do then with the F-111? And in colorful language, he said, General, you got to pull the wings off and make it into a taxi. So you can imagine a major telling this to a four-star general. Also, as a major, he was called to the Pentagon, and he testified on the development of a new aircraft. At the time, the Air Force had a mentality of bigger, higher, faster, and farther, and they were trying to develop an aircraft that was, that mold. And he convinced the people in the Air Force Systems Command that was the wrong approach. So they go to the House committee, and he's testifying before the House, before Representative Mendel Rivers, who was the head of that subcommittee. And Representative Rivers was trying to protect the Navy aircraft, which at that time was the F-14, and it had started into production. And Boyd listened to him and realized that the questions were driving General Ferguson from the Systems Command to answer that an answer that would force the Air Force to accept the Navy aircraft. And so the congressman put forward the question to the general and said, has the Air Force made a decision on the design? And Major Boyd interrupted General Ferguson and said, yes, sir, we believe that a variable geometry wing is not the answer. We want a fixed wing aircraft. And the general, of course, kind of startled. The congressman looked at the general and said, is that right? And after talking to Boyd, he said, yes, sir, that's correct. And that's what led to the development of the F-15. So while they put this into production, the Air Force did what it had been doing, and that is bigger, higher, faster, farther. And they added what was called gold plating. They added a ladder to the aircraft, and they built up a lot of systems that were weighed the aircraft down, and it was not the type of system that Boyd had envisioned. As he continued to promote in the Pentagon, he realized that the funding was the largest driver of defense policy. And so he came up with something called the to be or the to do speech. And he was working with Captain Raymond Leopold, who was an Air Force captain at the time. And he wanted him to look at the funding, all the funding that was going into the B-1. And at the time, the Strategic Command, of course, had priority over the fighters. And Boyd realized that the B-1 was consuming all that money. And so he motivated him by saying, I have it there in bold, but I think some of your images are blocking the right-hand side. Tiger, one day you will come to a fork in the road, and you're going to have to make a decision about which direction you want to go. You can, if you go this way, then you can be somebody. And what he was saying is, you can go ahead and you can promote, you'll make friends. He said, or you can do something. And so he said, if you do something, you won't have to compromise yourself. You'll be true to your friends and to yourself, and your work might make a difference. To be somebody or to do something in life, that is the call. That's when you'll have to make a decision to be or to do, which way will you go? And I think that he lived that, and he believed in that, and he lived that, and he taught that. So again, that shows his integrity. When he was at the Pentagon, now he's a lieutenant colonel, he was involved with other analysts, and they formed what became known as the fighter mafia. The term was actually coined by his boss. His name was Colonel Riccioni. And his Boyd and a man by the name of Pierre Spray, also an analyst, convinced the colonel that they needed a study to look into aircraft design. And so he came up with $150,000 and called it the study to validate the integration of advanced energy maneuverability theory with trade-off analysis, which in bureaucratese meant nothing. But they were able to hide the program. And what the program was a design contest between General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman, where General Dynamics was given the $49,000 and Grumman the $100,000 to develop these lightweight fighters. And the reason they were able to get away with this is both of the contractors knew that if the truth was discovered, the Air Force hierarchy would shut it down. And so they kept quiet, knowing one of them would get the aircraft design, and that's what led to the development of the F-16. So he knew how to work within the bureaucracy. One of the other persons that he developed a very close friendship with here is Chuck Spinney. He's another defense analyst, and he started to go through all the funding, and he realized the problem in the budgeting was that the military hierarchy was trying to increase defense budgets. So what they would do is they'd build these really expensive defense systems to basically pad the budget to get more funding that then they could use in other areas. And then they front load that by deliberately underestimating the cost. And so this report became a major news article. And the group of reformers of the fighter mafia were called to Congress. They developed very close relationships with a number of important members of Congress, including Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia, and also a congressman by the name of Dick Cheney, which will come in a little bit later. And this is a screenshot here of what the gold plating is. Later on in the program, I'll show you how you can actually pull the whole presentation down if you want to go over this at your leisure. During the Vietnam War, Boyd was sent over to Thailand. He was in charge of the McNamara Line. That was a series of sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And here again, we see the importance of integrity and doing the right thing. There was a fight that broke out, and a senior leader who was very conservative broke it up by sending the black men onto a helicopter and putting them under armed guard. And so racial riots started to break out, and Boyd heard about this. And so he ordered a lawyer to go to Bangkok, and he said, I want you to find out what happened. If they were involved in this fight, if they started the fight, then you leave them there. But if they didn't start them, you get them out and you bring them back here. So the lawyer found that all but one of them had nothing to do with starting the fight. And they brought him back. Boyd sat down with all of them and he said, listen, I'm the equal opportunity and training officer. I don't care what happened in the past. You know, we're going to do what's right here. And he was able to totally diffuse the crisis. He also showed his ability to have imaginative solutions. There was a major problem with graffiti on the grounds. And so he called in the sergeants and he said, you're going to stop it. And they pushed him back. They said, you know, Colonel, they don't care, you know. And he said, well, you're going to make them care. So he said, if you got to lock up all the latrines and make them go outside the fence, then you're going to do that. And the sergeants kept on pushing back and said, you know, Colonel, it doesn't matter. They don't care. And he made them care by saying, okay, I'll padlock your latrines. So you go and you clean these up and you paint them, and it worked. So he held people accountable. Towards the end of his career as a colonel, he started to get into military history, military philosophy, and he developed a theory on destruction and creation. And what he found is there were two ways to look at a problem to gain information. One would be through analysis, and that certainly helps to understand a process. But the other was synthesis. And what he discovered in this, it is an original piece of writing, is that the way you come about with creativity is not through analysis. It's by destroying your concept, by breaking things down, by getting outside the box, and then by synthesizing a new approach. And that was the source for creativity. And we can see that in a lot of his later theories here. He developed a brief called Patterns of Conflict. It started out with a 1-hour brief. And here we see a slide from one of the slides. And this is on Clausewitz, who was a military philosopher from the 19th century. He was actually in the Prussian military during the Napoleonic Wars. He wrote a book, which actually was never finished. But he goes over and he critiques Clausewitz, and he critiques a lot of the different writers. And the Marine Corps heard about this. And so the director of the Marine Corps Amphibious School, his name at that time was Major Wiley, called him up and he said, hey, I understand you have this theory. Would you like to come down and talk to my class? And Boyd said, it's not a theory, it's a briefing. And he said, great, I have 2 hours. He says, it's 5 hours long. And then Boyd said, I can't do it in 2. You either get 5 hours or you get nothing. So Wiley invited him down, and he went through the entire brief, and the book by Karam says that not a single Marine Corps officer left the room. And then after the brief, they stayed for hours to talk with them. So the Marine Corps is really the service that adopted Boyd. It wasn't the Air Force, it wasn't the Army, and the Navy kind of does their own thing as well. But the Marine Corps really took a close look at this, and they're the ones that started to push this. So another slide here. Again, critiquing Jomini. He was a French military historian, also from the 19th century, served under Napoleon. And he found that if you follow basic principles, that is the key to winning a battle. Anybody who has studied at a Joint Forces Staff College or the Army Force College would be familiar with this type of slide. It shows the national goals, the national strategy, all the way down to the tactical level. Slide 181, you can see it became actually a 2-day, 14-hour brief by the time he was done. But the principles of war would be another thing very familiar to staff officers for the military. I mentioned at the beginning, one of his major contributions was something called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And it was based on the writings of Sun Tzu, who was a military writer and philosopher of the Chinese dynasty back in around 500 BC. And it's based on the orthodox, known as the Shang, and the unorthodox, known as the Shi. And in looking at this, what Boyd discovered was that if you present yourself as ordinary, you can fool the opponent, you can orient the opponent in one axis, and then you can attack the opponent using another axis and then overrun that opponent. And so the whole key to this was a rapid movement to overwhelm the opponent so that they are unable to keep up with the rate of change. And in doing that, you end up victorious. And we see this philosophy really in the Iraq War. This is the first war, Desert Storm. And so General Schwarzkopf, who was in charge, wanted to go up the middle through Kuwait. And Boyd, who had developed that close relationship with the Secretary of Defense at the time, Dick Cheney, convinced him to create a ruse, which was the Marine Corps. So the Marine Corps was anchored off of Kuwait. It was 5 weeks of continual bombing, and then the actual movement of the military was around the end. And so in basically, once operations started, within 4 days, 100 hours, it was over. And so it was a remarkable success. I don't remember exactly how many American servicemen were killed, but it was under 100. And it led to the very rapid collapse of the Iraqi military and the peace that followed there. I have here some quotes from Boyd. If you're able, I think it's probably best to just read them yourselves. So just take a minute and look at those. And if you can't see them because your picture is blocking them, then I can go ahead and finish it for you. Any questions?
Brian, when you're finished with this tonight, is this printable, and could you get each of us a copy of this? We have at least one board member who's not with us right now. So if you could put this in a printed form and have the board secretary disseminate it to us, that would be helpful.
Absolutely, yes.
Good stuff. I happen to be aware of some of this. I read that book. You were going to show us, if you have it to hold up. I read that book about John Boyd. Became aware of this years ago when Harry Edwards, our former school director, who was active in the Harding, Gridley, Strong Vincent neighborhood, was seeking to bring recognition to this guy who too few Erieyites know about. But the book is a great book. It's interesting to hear how he grew up. He was what came to be known as one of the Bay Rats, and he swam in the bay, and he came up like any ordinary kid in that neighborhood. The book, it does not glorify militarism. It's just a tribute to how this ordinary Joe, this ordinary John, rose through the ranks and distinguished himself. I guess at the Pentagon, there's a suitable image of him on the wall that is fondly referred to by people there, and he's regarded not just in the U.S. military but worldwide as an all-time outstanding, distinguished strategist. It wasn't all about causing mayhem. It was about efficiency and saving lives and lots of money. But he just he was an analytical genius, and he did distinguish himself well. So I have a copy of that book that I read a few years ago. I may dig it out, but if any other board member or anybody else listening tonight is interested, I have the book. It's probably still obtainable also. Any questions or comments from the board?
I just have a couple more slides that I can show you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So here is a picture from the Proceedings magazine in 1997. This was written by Chuck Spinney, called Genghis John Boyd. And so it's a short piece. You can get it online if you want to go ahead and Google that. These are three of many books. As I mentioned, there are over 300 books and magazine articles on him. But the center one is the one that this presentation is based on. And it's a very readable book. It's a fascinating book, very well written. And it is truly a remarkable story. I can send a copy of the presentation, but I actually already have it posted on my webpage at Collegiate Academy. If you go to staff, teachers' web pages, I put it right at the top. So you can go through this at your leisure, but I'll also send a copy of the brief. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Very interesting. Wow.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Brian, I'm wondering what grade level would some of these readings be appropriate for? Is there a way that we could do some units of study with our middle school students or high school students? John?
There's a lot of very colorful language in the book.
Okay, never mind.
You know, I think you might want to be careful there. You know, the PowerPoint is certainly available, and I think the teachers could use that. It might be appropriate for juniors and seniors, but I don't know that having students read a chapter from the book would be, you know, something you might want to think twice about that.
Okay, thanks.
A few years back, when Harry Edwards was trying to bring attention to this man and find a suitable way to honor him, there was some hope that we could find a way to acknowledge him in some way. It was suggested that even Harding School's name be changed to John Boyd Elementary School, since he got his start there and grew up in the neighborhood. And he attended Gridley Junior High and Strong Vincent, both of which were named for local military distinguished people. So I don't know where it will lead, but that effort kind of fizzled when Harry Edwards passed away soon after he brought this matter to public light. But anyway, I think I heard you say in the beginning, Brian, that there's some interest in finding a way for the school district to acknowledge his accomplishments in his life. So I just put that out there for consideration. Brian Polito, do you have any more for us?
I do. Again, I'd also like to thank Mr. Lasher for coming tonight and presenting for us. Thank you for taking your time out of your day today to do that.
You're welcome, Mr. Polito. Thank you very much.
I just have two other items that I'd like to touch on tonight. One is about some of the recent unrest across the country. As most of you know, a little over 2 years ago, the district adopted our strategic plan, Mobilizing Community, Igniting Excellence. Many of you watching tonight were involved in that process. During the development, we identified several challenges, including a significantly higher rate of discipline among our Black students. In the plan, we recommitted to ensuring every learner receive a fair and equitable treatment, and set a goal of reducing behavior incidents involving Black students by 50% per year until proportional discipline rates were attained. The events that have occurred over the last 2 weeks, both nationally and locally, have really been a wake-up call for me personally. And I feel very strongly as a district that we're not moving fast enough to address these issues. We really need to put our actions behind our words. So to that end, starting with this upcoming school year, we will focus on the following 3 initiatives. First, we will review the operations of our district's police department with the ultimate goal of shifting its primary role from enforcement to community and relationship building. This is an initiative that Ms. McNair has been advocating for a number of years. We will also revise our student handbook and code of conduct with a focus on enhancing equity and ensuring that it reflects the best practices of the school-wide positive behavior intervention and supports framework. SWIBIS is a tiered framework of supports that encourage positive behavior and aims to improve academic and social success for all students. And finally, we will provide the necessary training to help our employees identify and eliminate racism in the district. Like the development of our strategic plan, these initiatives will be developed with input from stakeholders, including stakeholders who represent the diversity of our district and our community. We know we cannot dismantle systemic racism on our own, but we do embrace the responsibility to be a leader in the effort to do so, and we are committed to being a part of the solution. Lastly, I can't let tonight go by without recognizing my good friend and colleague, B. Habursky. B has started with the district in 1985 and has served as a teacher, counselor, principal, executive director of human resources, and for the last 3 years as assistant superintendent. This will be your final regular board meeting with the district. During her 35 years with the district, she has been a fierce advocate for children and a positive force for change. She has taught, mentored, and counseled thousands of students, teachers, and administrators, including me. B, it's been a pleasure to work with you. I'm a much better person and an administrator for it. Congratulations on your retirement and best of luck in this next phase of your life.
Anybody disagree with that? I hope not. I'm trying to be join in and express our mutual joined collective appreciation for all that B is and has done for us. Wish her well going forward.
Mr. President,
Yes, B.
may I say one thing, please?
Yes.
I'd like to thank the superintendent and the school board for these years of service. I've enjoyed working for the families, for the students, the teachers, the parents, and the administrators. And I will miss you all, but I will be there to support you as much as I can. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, B.
Thank you, B.
Thank you, B.
And that concludes my report for tonight, Mr. President.
Thank you, B.
We have a motion to approve and accept the report of the superintendent tonight.
Mr. President, I move that we accept the report of the president.
Superintendent.
Superintendent.
Okay, Darlene.
I second it.
Moved by Ms. Feeney, second by Ms. Sheridan. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? It's approved. There are no hearing of citizens because no one requested to be heard this evening. Next up is report of committees. Are there any reports of committees or liaisons? I would just mention it's not really an official board committee, but Mr. Ed Kissel, who's been heading the renovation, the repair and installation of a new Boletnikoff field sign, is still active at it despite the pandemic, and they're closing in on completion of their fundraising and eager to produce and install the final product for the public to see and enjoy probably in advance and without a dedication ceremony under these circumstances, but at some point, the ceremony would include Mr. Bletnikoff coming to town. He planned to do it this summer or fall, but the eruption of the health crisis, that's probably very unlikely, but Mr. Kissel indicated they don't want to wait for the day of a dedication. They just as soon get to sign up and then have the ceremony at a future time. So that's just a little bit of news on that. Is there any other thing under committee reports that anyone has or wants to mention? Okay, I think do we need a motion to, yes, we do. Is there a motion to approve the committee reports this evening?
So moved.
Moved by
Second?
Darlene, second by Rose. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Approved. There is no unfinished business. Can we have an all-inclusive motion that would include the new business, number 6 of the school district, and the supplemental new business, number 7 of the school district, as printed in, on your electronic devices?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Titus. Is there a second?
Second.
Is that Lori?
Yeah, that's Lori.
Okay, seconded by Lori Pickens. Any questions, discussion, comments? Included in tonight's thing is the new business is the naming and dedication of the new esports facility at Erie High that will be dedicated to Mr. Evan Tucker Jr. And we also have under the supplemental new business the approval of the bargaining agreement, the tentative agreement with Local 95. Happy news, they have ratified a new contract agreement. And John Kuhn has done a good job with the superintendent of getting us a pretty good deal on our banking, the new bank. So those things are there. Is there anyone that wants to question, discuss, or comment on? Roll call.
Ms. Cooley? Ms. Cooley?
Gwen, we know you're there. Are you muted?
Yes.
Mrs. Feeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nichols?
Yes.
Ms. Pickens?
Yes.
Ms. Sheridan?
Yes.
Mr. Titus?
Yes.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes. Can we have a motion for approval of meeting minutes for the meeting of May 13th, 2020 as attached electronically to the agenda?
I make a motion that we approve them.
I second it.
Seconded by Mr. Nichols. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Minutes approved. The bills and payrolls, may we have a motion to approve them for payment for the period from May 1st to May 29th, 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Moved it. Do you have the mover and the seconder?
I believe Mr. Titus and Ms. Cooley.
Sound right?
Yes.
Okay. Discussion? Roll call.
Ms. Cooley?
Yes.
Mrs. Feeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nichols?
Yes.
Ms. Pickens?
Yes.
Ms. Sheridan?
Yes.
Mr. Titus?
Yes.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes. We have a motion to approve the report of the secretary as attached electronically to the agenda.
So move.
By Mrs. Cooley,
I'll second it.
second by Sumner Nichols. Discussion? Roll call.
Ms. Cooley?
Yes.
Mrs. Feeney?
Yes.
Mr. Nichols?
Yes.
Ms. Pickens?
Yes.
Ms. Sheridan?
Yes.
Mr. Titus?
Yes.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes. Under bids to be awarded, we have 3. Do we take them separately? We did that last month, Tim, for some reason.
We did do that last month, but you can do it all if you'd like.
Can we have an all-inclusive motion and include the 3 awards that are before us tonight for award?
So moved.
Second.
Darlene and Gwen?
Yep.
I'm working on my hearing. Okay, any discussion? Roll call.
Ms. Cooley,
Yes.
Mrs. Feeney,
Yes.
Mr. Nichols,
Yes.
Ms. Pickens,
Yes.
Ms. Sheridan,
Yep.
Mr. Titus,
Yes.
Mr. Harkins.
Yes. Now we're at the point where, is there any other board matter for board discussion?
Mr. President?
Darlene?
Yes, tonight we approved the retirement of 14 of our teachers. And I just wanted to take a moment to publicly thank them all. Many of them I've worked with either in school buildings or on committees. We're going to miss them. We thank them for their contribution to the Erie School District. And here they are, Kim Bliley, Lori Christensen, Ann Doherty, Karen Haas, Deb Ianello, Jill Kolakowski, Joyce Moon, Barb Nodznikowski, Carrie Phillips, Linda Pryor, Kirsten Rinkovich, Jane Ross, Brian Sheldon, and Patty Zielinski. We wish them all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. If there's nothing else, I'll just mention a couple of things. We did turn in our individual evaluations of the superintendent recently, and we talked about a week ago, we talked about having a follow-up meeting to discuss it with the superintendent. My recommendation or my best suggestion is that when we have our meeting to adopt a budget, once the adoption's over with, that we then have an executive session in which we can sit either in person or electronically and kick around the contents of our evaluation and discuss it with the superintendent. If we had it in advance of that budget meeting, we might feel pressured to hurry up. And if it's afterwards, then it could be more relaxed. Tonight, we heard of other suggestions for another meeting before the budget adoption meeting. So we have a couple options. And the other thing I think we ought to mention is earlier this evening when we were in executive session, we talked about whether we would right now at the close of this meeting have a brief executive session to decide what we're going to do about assessment appeals going forward. So I guess I'll ask first if there's anything else that anyone wants to bring up about anything else, but before too long here, I'll just ask if the majority of the board would want to have another brief executive session about that assessment strategy.
Mr. President, I did have one thing I would like to bring up.
Go ahead, Tyler.
First, I wanted to say thank you to our superintendent, Mr. Polito, for discussing the systemic racism that's within the education system. We've seen the civil unrest that's moving across, globally, but more specifically within our nation right now, due to many things compounding right now. But what I would like to suggest to the board that I would be more than willing to head up is that we do a deep dive into some of the systemic racism within the education system, so they understand why this is so important that we are looking at this, and why the strategic plan is the way the strategic plan is. And I commend again for the superintendent for bringing those up and pointing out our commitment to those points. Similar to the fashion that we had the presentation tonight around the history, I think it is important to understand the history and how the systemic racism plays out in the education system now. And I'd work with Mr. Nixon or some of the other board members and some community members to put this presentation together and bring it to the board after we are able to complete the budget season within July.
work on it with Ken Nixon during July and maybe August and bring it back to us at the start of the school year? Sumner, how does that, or Tyler, how does that?
I would like to have this maybe presented before the school year begins, so that this could be something that is either that we as a board are committing to working on, and that teachers also are receiving the same message from the board, and the community is receiving the same message from the board.
Mr. President, I would just like to say that I appreciate Tyler's comments and his willingness. I would like to also say that I would very much heavily want to be involved, since I've been involved in this from the beginning, even involved in creating the idea of Mr. Nixon's position through starting the diversity committee with B. So whatever you're doing on this end with Ken, or anything that has to do about diversity or anything like that, I've been involved heavy, and started the first diversity crew that was in the district. So I would very much like to be involved in whatever presentation that we're doing about systemic racism, as I've had numbers pulled at different schools, and things like that. So and I've also advocated with Ken for diversity training in our staff. So I would definitely like to be very much heavily involved, as I already am.
Noted. Thank you.
Tyler, Angela, and Ken want to work together?
Tyler, I'd like to work with you on this initiative as well. Thank you for bringing it up. And Angela, thank you for all that you've done to help our district move forward. And Brian, thank you, Brian.
You want to proceed then to do that as outlined by Tyler? Let's do that with Angela and Darlene involved also. Okay. Now, do you want to have it? Does the majority want to have an executive session? We should settle one way or another what we want to do about that assessment question we were kicking around in our earlier executive session. Seems to me we ought to at least meet to decide whether we're going to decide it. If there's no objection to that, let's bring this meeting to an end and then go into executive session for that purpose to discuss the legal matter. So this meeting of the Board of Directors is hereby adjourned, and everyone who needs to stay on for the executive session, please do.